What's happening, everybody? Happy July. We are getting that much closer to Saints training camp inside Black and Gold with Steve Geller and Jeff Nowak. Man, oh man, football around the corner. And it's, you're desperate when you're just looking forward to seeing guys practicing at this point.
It's only 2 weeks away. We're 2 weeks away from, I guess, 2 weeks and a day away from the first day of practice. But, 2 weeks, veterans will be in California. Rookies are going to report, I think, next week. I think the 13th. And so, man, yeah, it's going to be here. Like, I keep looking at it and saying, like, it's not till the end of July. I got time. I don't got that much time. We don't got that much time.
No, not when it's just 2 weeks, like you said.
Right. I took last week off, so I'm feeling energized. Let's see how long that lasts. That's the real question. Is how long before
you'll be spent?
How long before the world beats me back down and we're like, no. But yeah, so it's kind of this to me. This is kind of like the gearing up and getting ready, and that's what we're gonna do on the podcast. We're gonna get a bunch of segments out there that kind of get you ready for the start of camp and kind of looking ahead to the regular season. I have a few segment ideas. We're gonna talk about X factors at some point. We're gonna do bold predictions at some point. I want to do another edition of kind of the ranking the positions that we did last year. Learned a little bit from the ranking system. I've adjusted the scores to be a little more representative of like stuff like I don't have playoff experience rated as high. Like I have like starter quality rated at like 30 points in terms of that's way more valuable to like the grade. Whereas last year, everything was kind of flat. So I've got that down. That's going to be something we do maybe next week. Today, I wanted to talk about, who has the most pressure on them heading into the season. And that, not necessarily completely tied to camp, but is going to kind of envelop camp and move on. So that's what we're going to talk about in the second and third segments today. I wanted to get into a little bit of news in the top end here, though. And that's, okay, we finally got dates for camp. They don't really matter because they're gone, right? Normally the dates would be interesting to look at for the average fan because they're like, oh, which practice do I want to go to?
Well, there's two at least.
There are two. And that's kind of what we kind of anticipated was the Saints are going to try to do something when they come back to get fans engaged and get fans in the building. And that is what happens. So if you're kind of scoring at home, you have about a month of practices in San Francisco. I'm sorry, in California. They'll have joint practices with San Francisco. Those will be Thursday, August 15th, Friday, August 16th. Both will be in pads. So those will be really interesting to watch and learn from. Fans won't be able to be there. And we'll get into that subject in a minute. But after that game, the Saints are going to be coming back. They're traveling back to New Orleans on August 19th. And then the next day, they'll have a practice at Yulman Stadium. So that's Tulane Stadium, which is pretty cool. They haven't done that in a while. And I imagine it'll be at night. The time is not set yet. Right. But I figure that's why they're doing it there is because they want to have a night practice under the lights, which I think will be pretty cool. They just haven't done a lot of that in the last several years. They used to do practices at Yulman. They used to do the softball game at Turchin Field, which is Tulane's baseball field. They haven't done that. So I appreciate that they're getting back into that mold of using Tulane's facilities where they can put people in stands and maybe have some concessions, stuff like that. So that'll be the first one. And that's new. We haven't seen them do that in the past few years.
Yeah, like you said, it's been a minute since they've done that. And definitely, you mentioned that softball matchup. I missed that. That was a lot of fun getting to be in the dugout, hanging out with players. I thought was very cool. And seeing Drew Brees throw a hissy fit if he didn't win the home run derby was always fun.
Well, it is funny watching these guys get super competitive about something that they're not professional at, like something that does not matter at all to them, which is like hitting softballs out of a field. I think Zach Wood was surprisingly good. I think he won the home run derby twice in a row.
Right.
Which, that makes sense. Zach Wood is just a guy who specializes in very specific things, and he's really good at hitting softballs out of the park. But so this year, again, so that's going to be August 20th. You'll have the practice there. I don't imagine there will be an attendance cap on either of these practices because the next one is going to be Friday, August 23, and is going to be in the Superdome. It's something they did last year as well, where they invited all the fans and they pretty much filled up the lower bowl. And it's pretty cool. It's kind of a game atmosphere almost. We got fans cheering and getting excited. The weather's not going to be an issue, which that's always something with these practices. It's right. How much can you enjoy a practice when you're sitting out there sweating to death? You don't have to deal with that for that one practice, which is nice, because some people I think just can't handle the heat, like in terms of, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean, like, if you're a 75-year-old grandma sitting out in 95-degree heat for 2 hours to watch a Saints practice is not really something you want to be doing. So it's nice to be able to get everyone inside. So that said, practices that you can go to, again, August 20th, August 23, one at Yulman Stadium, one at the Superdome. And so they are finding a way to get fans to practice. That is the silver lining of this whole thing, is you get an extra kind of built out practice where they can pull out all the stops and do all the fan stuff after they come home. So that's really the only 2 dates that you need to concern yourself with.
Yeah, like you mentioned too, no times yet on them. But both instances, the Yulman practice is obviously outside. But man, if you can take the kiddos to the Superdome, I know it's kind of tough to get a family into an NFL football game. So get that Superdome experience, a little taste of what the Saints are like in there. Because come the preseason or regular season, you just know how much parking, ticket prices can be. Free access for a practice in the Superdome is mighty fun.
I mean, I don't know how expensive the tickets to that Titans preseason game are going to be. So you could probably get in there too. Just saying. And hey, some of these, if week 1 wasn't the season opener, that game would be pretty cheap too against the Panthers, but it'll probably be expensive. If things go a certain way, you might see some real cheap tickets later in the year, but we'll get to that bridge.
Hopefully not the case, right?
Yeah. Well, that's water over the bridge, or is that the saying? No, that's not the saying, but that's how I'm going to use it. But yeah, so, I'm not going to go into takeaways from these practices, but I will get into the subject of, hey, why aren't they having open fan practices in California?
The Saints hate the Who Dat Nation, right?
They hate you. Now, the interesting thing is, like, a joint practice typically would be this big fan event, right? Like when we went to Costa Mesa last year, there was tons of fans there. There were Saints fans there. Like I saw a good number of Saints jerseys in that crowd, but that's because, hey, this is a Chargers practice. They handled this. So the Saints show up. They didn't have anything to do. They didn't have to do anything in terms of organizing these open practices. So that's where you'd have it. If the Saints ended up having those joint practices against the Texans last year, I think they would have had at least one of those be open. This year, it's not. So you have this kind of unique situation where the 49ers are actually traveling to practice with the Saints at the campus of UC Irvine. So these are kind of these closed off joint practices. Like when you were at the Packers joint practices, there was a lot of fans there. It was this whole fan event. This year, it's going to be all closed off. And so it's really just going to be watching these kind of high intensity practices and reporting it out. So it's kind of weird. It's just not a situation you typically see, because usually when you do a joint practice, it's going to be one team traveling to another team's kind of home facility where they could make it open easily.
What's rough about that too, obviously, is the fact that with no fans present, they're a lot more stricter on what the media is able to, film and release.
That's a good point.
There aren't as many eyes on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like normally during open practices, they're just like, well, the fans could do whatever, so the media is allowed to do whatever. We won't have that this year. And so the question becomes, okay, why aren't the Saints having open practices? And what I'll say to that is, you'll see people say, well, the Rams did it at the same facility last year. They had the open practices. It can be done. You'll see videos of them having fans there. What I'll say is, like, if you've ever been to a Saints practice, you look around and you see all the personnel that is there just for that. Like, I would say 80% of the personnel on hand dealing with the open practices, they're not, I mean, I don't know if they're full-time employees, but they are not people who would be there day to day. Like, they have people checking bags. They have people, wandering around hurting people. You have all the bleachers that are brought in specifically for those events. You have all of that infrastructure that's a lot easier to manage at home than it would be on the road in Irvine. And so, you can be mad about it. I'm just giving you the rundown of like why the Saints wouldn't do it. And it's because that's a big ask to put that whole thing on the road and say, okay, where do we get bleachers? What are the staff? Like, you can't just invite people and say, go hang out around the perimeter of the field. There's security issues. You're going to have like on-site security in case anything gets out of hand. You'll have to have EMS who can make sure, if you invite a fan and they, fall down from heat exhaustion because you don't provide them water that the team's liable. So I think at the end of the day, it just became an issue of, is
Staffing.
it worth the complications that would be created by having to take that on the road, right? And the added expense to something that is already, I guarantee you, insanely expensive for the team as they try to figure this out. And you also don't know, like, would fans show up even if you did all that? So I understand why they're not. And I think at the end of the day, it came down to, okay, we could either do, we could either put all this effort into making some of these practices in Irvine open, or we can do the two kind of pull out all the stops practices at home. And I understand why they erred on that side. I don't know if you were going to do both. One other thing we'll get into before we move on here. Do you hate Dennis Allen? You're not alone. And I don't know, like we get all these surveys in our inboxes, but so many of them seem to come in the frame of like, Dennis Allen is rated the worst head coach in the NFL. Dennis Allen is the most hated head coach among his own fans in the NFL. And I like a lot of times I'm like, oh, whatever, like this is stupid. What's the sample size? What's whatever. I believe this one.
I do have a problem though. The one last bullet point they had of 55% of Saints supporters confess to not knowing who the head coach is. What?
Yeah, that doesn't seem. Yeah, what's the sample you're actually pulling from there? And that's my issue. But it's Research Frontier. They did a survey. They said they talked to 3,000 NFL fans to uncover the level of familiarity with their team's head coach. Where are you finding these fans? First of all, who exactly are you talking to? Is this Twitter? Is this social media? Is this whatever? But they found that he ranks as the least liked NFL head coach, scoring just 5 out of 10 in likability among Saints supporters. The average score for an NFL head coach's likability in this survey was 7 out of 10. And then, 55%, they said, of Saints supporters confessed to not knowing who their head coach is.
How's that possible?
That seems to invalidate your findings.
Yes.
How can you say that he's the least liked head coach when half the people you talked to couldn't even tell you who the head coach was?
Wild.
But at the same time, like whether there's sample size and sampling issues with this survey, I do believe that you go around the NFL and if you surveyed every fan base, maybe, I don't know if he's by far the least liked, but I would believe that
he's down there, right?
He's down toward the bottom. And that's not really saying anything about his actual coaching. That's just like the sentiment. It's not positive.
It didn't help with last year after that Falcons game in the post-game press conference where it just wasn't a good look of basically going against the players instead of keeping quiet about it. And everyone perceived as him apologizing to Arthur Smith.
He doesn't play the game in terms of finding ways to ingratiate himself to the fan base. And that's not necessarily because he doesn't want to. I think he just doesn't know how to do it. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with his coaching quality. But I do think like there is a significant amount of like, I just don't like this guy. And at the end of the day, if you win at a high level, fans will find a way to like you more.
Right.
But like for example, Sean Payton went 9-8 in his final season and got nothing but praise for it. Last year, the Saints went 9-8, and all you heard about was how terrible things were all the time. I think that is directly related to the feelings, the emotional, visceral reaction when it comes to Dennis Allen and by proxy, Derek Carr. And I do think it's funny, but also, Dennis Allen was the lowest rated head coach in those NFLPA rankings among coaches that are not going into their first year or were in their first year, right? Like, so it's not just the fans who seem to not like Dennis Allen. Like the players might not necessarily like Dennis Allen, or at least in the sense of how they were grading him in those rankings, which is not exactly public in terms of what they were talking about. But, I don't think that it's a coincidence. Like a lot of times I'll look at this and say like, who are you talking to? This doesn't seem like it's kind of placed in the reality around the Saints. This one does. Like that's definitely true.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we've talked about it before. There's that dislike for the coach and the quarterback. And honestly, Carr's season wasn't awful. He dealt with some injuries, closed out strong, but overall, I think it's that just DA and DC connection. For some reason, they just have gotten under the skin of fans, and 11-12 win season though could sure cure that.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about the last bullet point of like, you're talking to people, 55% of them don't know who the head coach is. How? He's been around for 6 years.
Exactly.
Like, that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. And I think whether the survey, we stopped talking about the survey itself, but like, I think one of the reasons that people don't like Dennis Allen is they are very aware of who he is. Like, they know him. If he was a second-year head coach, you'd be like, oh, he's growing. You know, it was like, well, he's been here for so long that it's like he's not getting that grace of that, like, you know, and obviously people are very aware of what happened with the Raiders. And so he's not getting that same level of like, you know, like Brian Daboll is an unlikable guy, but he's in his third year with a in his first coaching stint. So you're like, okay, maybe he can be that, you know, maybe he can grow into that. Sean Payton was an unlikable guy early in his coaching career. But like, he just found a way to win right away. And so you look past a lot of that. You know, like, there's a lot that happened with Sean Payton that was not exactly sunshine and rainbows, but he was embraced in terms of like, people just found a way. And that's just something that I don't know if will ever happen with Dennis Allen. If he wins, I'm honestly like, one of the reasons I'm rooting for him, for this team to win at a high level, is because I do want to see people have to come to terms with that idea of like, I hate this guy and I still hate this guy, but they're winning games. So how do I reconcile those two thoughts? Because I want them to win games. But I also just want this guy to go away and not be on my TV screen anymore. And then Derek Carr to that extent too. But I think those two, they're related in that way. Like, I don't think those two things can be separated in terms of the sentiment around Derek Carr and the sentiment around Dennis Allen, because I think most people view them as a package deal, or at least the 45% of the fans that they talked to that knew who Dennis Allen was. I do think that it would be funny if like they showed a picture of Dennis Allen and said, do you know this guy's name? Because I do think that he is very generic, like CoachBot 13. You know, like they put out that picture, that group photo of all the coaches from like the owners meetings every year.
Right.
I think it was Travis Kelce. They like went on that podcast they do with Jason and Travis.
Yes.
They like went through. It's like, okay, name all the head coaches you can recognize. He just could not name Dennis Allen.
Oh man, really? Dang.
I would, you know, that's one thing that I think would be funny if you went around the NFL with that photo, with that group photo, and just asked players,
who is this?
Tell me all the coaches in here, that you point to the coaches and tell me their name. And you would just mark down like, okay, how many players around the NFL can actually pick Dennis Allen out of a lineup? And I don't think it's very high.
Yeah, he's been around for a while too, obviously.
I think if you ask people who is Dennis Allen, like, that's my point. It's like, if you ask people who Dennis Allen is, they would say he's the head coach of the Saints. If you showed people a picture of Dennis Allen and say, a picture of all 32 head coaches and say, pick out Dennis Allen, I don't think many people could do it. Now, Saints fans, probably it's a high number. Anywhere else, probably not. And I think that's part of like the idea around this team is it's a boring team now.
Yeah.
Where did the excitement go? Because it's not here anymore.
No, DA definitely needs like a moment to like somehow boost that's able to boost his perception amongst fans. I don't know what it could be besides winning.
The only thing it could be is winning games. There's nothing else.
Sean was really animated on the sidelines. We saw him giving choke signals or, you know, mouthing off to players. I don't know what DA has to do, but something.
You know, and this is kind of tangentially related to what we're going to be talking about in the next two segments, but in the sense that there is, if I was coming up with a list of the people on the Saints with the most pressure on them, Dennis Allen would be at the top of the list.
Absolutely.
Now, we're talking about players here. We're not talking about coaches. So he's not going to be on my list, but there is going to be a guy on my list who's going to be directly related to this pressure that's on Dennis Allen, because his performance is probably the key to whether Dennis has another season or not. So we'll dive into that. But that's it. Anything else you want to mention before we move on here?
No, just looking forward, obviously, the end of the month we mentioned with training camp starting, and man, oh man, the way the Heat's been, I think we start complaining about the Heat, obviously, every summer in New Orleans, but it's definitely been dialed up to broil of lately. So I know the players have to be looking forward to Irvine.
Yeah, we're well into the time of year where I do not go outside unless I absolutely have to. So there's days, there are entire days where the only time I go outside is to walk the dog. Today is one of those days.
Right. That's like scurry back to the shade.
Yeah. Yeah. But all right, let's hit the break and we will come back and we'll hit the, we're going to kind of run through the top. I ranked the top 15. We're going to just kind of run through the first 10. And then the final segment, we're going to really dive into the top 5 because those are the ones that are probably the most interesting to talk about. But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. This is ranking season, so we're not shying away from it. We will be right back. Here's some ads. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller. We are diving into our latest list, which I appreciate everyone who watched last episode or listened to last episode. It was fun to do. It wasn't our most popular episode, but I do enjoy kind of diving into the old Saints topics when we can because it was so much more fun back then.
The fun days. Yes, winning is fun.
Right. But on this list, we are going to be diving into the players on the 2024 Saints who, at least in my view, and I know you're gonna opine on this, are facing the most pressure this season, and that can be defined in a few ways. But in most cases, it's okay. Is your job on the line? Like, or is this a player that, based on the performance this season, could be somewhere else next season? Could be playing a different position next season? Are you kind of in a spot where you have to reinforce that you are the future at this position? And there's a lot of players who kind of fall into that category. Some are veterans, some are young players. But this segment, we're going to kind of run through the first 10. So if we're going out to 15 through 6, which, there's a few players. You're talking about Peyton Turner's, Isaiah Foskey's, guys that you really want to see find a role. But I don't think there's a ton of pressure on that. It's more just like, prove what you can do. I don't think that anyone was looking at Isaiah Foskey and saying, if you can't do it this year, we're going to quit on him. And with Peyton Turner, I think it's like, I don't know if there's pressure to stay healthy. There's really nothing you can do from a physical perspective to avoid your tendons and your foot ripping at a really inconvenient point. So I don't put a ton of pressure on him. So he's outside my list. 15 and 14, I'm putting Kendre Miller and Alvin Kamara kind of in that range of like, I'd like to see Kendre prove that in year 2 that he's capable, but he's still down pretty far on my list. Alvin, his situation is going to be contingent on how this contract works out. Because if he pushes for it and the Saints, kind of balk and say, hey, we're going to give you this huge extension, then the pressure goes way up. If it ends up being kind of a just fair market, reasonable deal, then, I don't see a huge amount of pressure on that. And just generally speaking, I don't see a ton of pressure on Alvin other than like, yeah, you're a big part of this offense and the Saints need you to have success. But if that doesn't work out, then you're kind of just where you were previously. So I don't put him high on my list. I don't think there's a ton of pressure on him other than like, hey, this offense should work for you. And if it does, great.
I love the fact that you let off with Turner and Foskey, because when you sent me the list, that was the first names that I was thinking of that weren't on there, but it makes sense. Obviously, we're not writing off Foskey if he happens to have a down year. And Peyton Turner, yeah, a lot of it has to do with health with him. With the running back situation, man, it's going to be so crucial this year. I love the fact both of them back-to-back there. Want to see something more out of Miller. We saw flashes last year. Would like to see more consistency, obviously, out of him. And with AK, can he become that weapon like a McCaffrey in this Clint Kubiak system? Because there's not going to be that excuse of the old ways of, Sean Payton / Pete Carmichael offense holding him back, and hopefully can reignite some kind of spark in AK, because we just haven't seen that specialness from him. And I do believe he still has it, even though he's approaching 29 years old at the end of the month.
Yeah, I think the excuses are gone. I think that's the biggest difference this year is there's no excuses left to be made of like, this is Pete Carmichael's fault. This is whatever. Like, you're going to figure it out. I think the way his contract situation gets handled is going to be directly impacting this concept of like, yeah, if he forces the team's hand, then yeah, you better have a big season. if you're making this all awkward and then you don't deliver, then there's a lot of pressure. But right now I don't know. And I'm kind of going based on like, okay, where we are right now. So he's pretty far down my list. The next two are kind of 13, 12. The defensive interior, I really need Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard to show up. When we talked to Joe Woods prior to the draft, he made a point to say like, no, we need to stop the run better. Like we need to improve there. The Saints, he kind of said that in the indication that like the Saints were going to be looking at the defensive interior in the draft, maybe in the early rounds. They didn't. They drafted Christian Boyd in the 6th round. Not exactly a huge investment. Brian Brzee, who was pretty far down my list in terms of the pressure on him, is obviously a big part of that. I want to see him kind of step up and have a bigger role. But one of those two guys has to be an impact player for this team on the interior. I think they can be. So there is some level of pressure on them because, especially Nathan. I think the more pressure's on Nathan in the sense that, okay, if you're going to be the rundowns guy, you got to stop the run. Otherwise, we might as well have the young player in there getting better. Colin Saunders is kind of the run stuffing tackle. So, I think this defense, to get it going, you can't be allowing 4 or 5 yards on first down. So I do put a good bit of pressure on them.
Hell to the yeah, for sure. And when you mention even Shepard, did we talk to him all season beside his introductory press conference? I don't know.
He's not a guy who likes to talk. He's quiet, and I don't mind that. Like, what's the question that you're going to ask him? Like, it's really more about performance than anything else. Like,
no, it just seemed like out of sight, out of mind all season. And that it kind of was on the football field too. Yeah.
And we'll see. I'd like to see Brian kind of take a chunk out of his role. So yeah. We'll see. Like, I don't know. One of those two guys though. So I kind of put them together. Then Jamal Williams is 11th. I just think, there's got to be pressure on him because he did nothing last year. So you can't just be a team leader. You have to also deliver. And so I put him and Cam. Like, Cam is number 10 on this list, in my opinion. And they're similar in, Cam obviously gets the benefit of being around forever and being healthy for the entire time. But he also didn't deliver last year. And so, like, there's leadership, but that only goes so far in terms of getting you on the field. Because if you're not delivering when you're on the field, your snap share has to go down. And so for both of those guys, I think it's a situation. You're veterans, you are trusted, but in the pressure on them is going to come early in the season because you're going to have to be making those decisions as you go. Whereas like, where's the impact coming from? And one's on offense, one's on defense. If you're Cam and you're not getting the job done, then you're going to start ceding snaps to some of these younger guys behind you because you have depth, right? Like you got Carl Granderson, you got Peyton Turner, you got Isaiah Foskey, you got Chase Young. They're all going to be on the roster. So where are they going to play, right? You're not going to take Carl off the field, a young player who's kind of like growing into his prime. So it's going to have to come from Cam's side of the equation, and it's going to be on him to fend those guys off. Same with Jamal, right? Like if they end up with Jamal as kind of that second string guy in front of Kendre, well, if Jamal's not delivering, then you have to change that up. So for both of those guys, I think the pressure is going to be to deliver early in the season to prove that, that's not going to be an issue all season long, and you don't have to make changes. So that's kind of where I put them on that spectrum. And I think Cam, I have faith that he's going to, I think that was kind of more of just an issue. He was hurt a lot. I played through it. He wasn't necessarily as impactful during that time, but he was still kind of an efficient player against the run. So I more expect him to kind of bounce back. I don't know much about Jamal. We'll have to see.
Totally agree on Cam, because if we were disappointed, fans were disappointed, you can just imagine how Cam felt about last season. Interested to see, obviously, how a healthier Cam bounces back this season. I do not think he's washed or done. Everyone wants to say, it's time to put him as a coach on this squad. Nah, Cam still got game left in him. And with Jamal, I'm hoping to see, I guess, him be more acclimated in the life of being a New Orleans Saint. I don't know if he ever really fully embraced it last year. I know he's a different cat. He's got a good personality, though. I think he's a lot of fun, but it just never seemed like he really fit, from even stupid little things on social media when they had the crawfish boil to him making fun of beignets. He needs to be more New Orleans, and I just want to see, obviously, him produce better on the field because, man, you went from 17 touchdowns to 1, and that 1 was a wash as well.
I don't really care if he likes beignets or not. Like, I couldn't care less. Like, to me, that's that's not a part of the equation. I need to see him produce on the field.
It would
right?
just
he could be the biggest
of New Orleans to me, though. I don't know.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if he does the same thing as last year and he suddenly is like pronouncing beignets correctly. I'm not going to feel differently, right? Like if he becomes a integral part of this roster, then sure, we can start talking about that. But right now, I need to see a football player who's worthy of a roster spot.
No, I just think overall, for whatever, he wasn't happy with leaving Detroit, wasn't happy with the situation in New Orleans. It just didn't translate last year, and just hoping to see a different dude on the field.
Yeah, again, to me, it's all about the field. Like, I don't like with Derek, with a quarterback, I feel like there's a little bit more to it where you're kind of a figurehead. You're an important part of the culture, the fan culture. With your backup running back, like, did Latavius Murray ever become a part of New Orleans? No, but he was efficient and productive, and people appreciated that. This is not what we've seen out of Jamal. That's what I need to see. So we're into the top 10 now, and these next few, there's not really a ton to talk about. So Taliesin Fuanga, like, you know, he's the only rookie on this list, and you know, and it's a different kind of pressure for Taliesin. It's, you know, it's game pressure. It's right away, day one, you're going to be asked to be doing one of the most difficult things on the field, which is playing left tackle. And, you know, I don't think anyone's going to quit on him if he struggles, but you're put in a position where if you struggle, it's high profile and it's going to be a problem for this team. And that's not a spot you want to put anybody in. So we'll have to see how he handles it. But there's no denying that when you put a rookie starter at left tackle, particularly a guy who didn't really play left tackle in college,
we're just going to put him at a new spot.
Now, I'm not going to say he's up in the top 5, but he's definitely, like, there's going to be a ton of pressure because if he just doesn't have it, if he can't hack it, I don't know where you go.
The need for him to be at least, you know, serviceable, unlike what Trevor Penning's been over the past couple years. The Saints must have a ton of faith, though, in his abilities to be able to wanting to switch him to the left side, which just is wild to me for a rookie coming in as someone that's been used to playing on the right side.
See, I do think they have confidence in him to do it, but at the same time, like, you could make just as big of an argument that they didn't have a choice. Like, it's not like they have all these great options and they're like, oh, he's the best of them. They have one option, it's him.
Yeah.
Like you might have some veterans who could go in there and play, but they're not. So anyway, like, there's pressure. If he delivers, great. If not, like, man, you're in some serious trouble. So no question. Next,
if only we had Andrus Pete.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, well, at the same time, it's like with their expectations were so low that Andrus delivered for them. So, like, it's not like he's trying to follow up Teron Armstead here. If he's serviceable, that's a win. But that's the pressure. The pressure is to make sure you are a serviceable left tackle. You don't have to be a Pro Bowler, but you have to get the job done. And we'll see how that goes. Number 8 is another. It's kind of similar in the sense that it's Chase Young, and the pressure isn't Saints-centric pressure. I don't think there's a ton of pressure from a roster perspective because you do have options, right? Like, you have Peyton Turner, you have Isaiah Foskey, you have guys who can step in if he just shits the bed. But from a career perspective, from an NFL perspective, there's a ton of pressure on him to deliver this season. Because if you don't, where do you go from here? You signed a 1-year prove-it deal. You know, part of that was due to the injury. But, like, if you don't deliver in this season, I don't know where you sign your next contract. Like, look at Marcus Davenport, right? Like, he didn't go up from his 1-year, $13 million deal with the Vikings. He went down. He's on the Lions now on another prove-it deal that's even less lucrative. So that's kind of where Chase Young is. If Chase Young has the season that Marcus Davenport had with the Vikings, then I don't know, your career is at a point where you're just go wherever they'll have you. Like, there won't be that level of interest that you had this year. So that's where the pressure is for him. So it's kind of it's kind of like Taliesin, where it's like it's not like, oh, you're trying to retain your roster spot. You're trying to do whatever. You just got to perform when you're out there.
What's wild with Chase Young too, you look at it, he's still just 25 years old. It seems like he's been in the league much longer than that.
I mean, yeah, well, 25, you know, that's the point where you should be signing that big contract.
Yeah.
That's where the pressure is, because once you get to like 27, 28, you're not getting handed those contracts anymore. Like, this is your prime contract years. So we'll see if he can do it.
Definitely, like you said, it's all about what's in store for Young going forward. And we've seen the injury history with him be a problem. But yeah, definitely a key point, like you said, career-wise, not so much, oh my God, his roster spot's in danger.
Okay, now the next two, there is a little bit more roster pressure on them. And I kind of vacillated on which I'm going to put first. And when we get into the position battles, these are two guys we'll talk about. But so 7, I'm putting Pete Werner. And, you know, for him, it's like, yeah, they bring in both these players. And I'll just tell you, 6 Alontae Taylor as a slot corner. And both are examples of players who are now suddenly getting pushed at a position they were not really getting pushed last year with high profile names, or at least guys you brought in for a specific reason. And for Pete, it's Willie Gay. For Alontae, it's Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's a rookie who we haven't seen on the field yet. Now, Pete, I think, has the inside track at being the will linebacker like he has been the last several years, but it's not a given. And, you know, I think Pete's an interesting case because Pete was really freaking good for like a month. And I'm talking like all pro good for like a month at the start of the 2022 season. He was everywhere. He was averaging 10 tackles a game. He had 40 tackles, 32 solo tackles over the first 4 games of the 2022 season. He was everywhere. He was making plays. He was flying around. And he dealt with injuries. I think it was an ankle injury in 2022 that kind of lingered, and he dealt with it. He missed several games. Just never got back to that. He had 80 total tackles in that season, right? So he had the same amount of tackles over his final 13 games as he had in his first 4 games. Last year, he had 93 total tackles. He played in 16 games. He was mostly healthy. I think he dealt with some minor injuries, but he was mostly healthy. Just wasn't the impact player that you would have expected to see as he developed from that year 2 into kind of this guy who you might look at as this long-term answer as your kind of linebacker of the future. Like DeMario, as much as it seems like he's going to play forever, isn't going to play forever. Eventually, you're going to have to replace him. And I think early in 2022, you were like, man, this Pete is going to be this guy. We're going to love DeMario as long as he's here, but then we're going to feel like the linebacker position is in good hands. The way you saw him play last year, while not terrible, just didn't have the same impact. And so to me, there's a lot of pressure on him this year. 1, because he's getting pushed for that role, but 2, because he's in a contract year. And he's got to earn that next deal. Like he and Paulson Adebo are both in contract years. Paulson Adebo wasn't on my list because Paulson's already showed over multiple seasons that he is that consistent high-level performer. We've seen flashes of it from Pete, but we have not seen it consistently. And if he can't do that this year, I think you let him walk.
No, between you mentioned with Warner last year on the field, coverage skills, pass rush, nothing seemed to be going well at all for him and was really a non-factor at all on the defense.
I mean, he made some plays. He had an interception in one game. He had a half sack. Like he had moments. He had nice moments, but you need more than that. Yeah, and that's why I think like Willie Gay, if Pete's not getting the job done, he can take that spot. Now, I think the goal for Willie is to get him on the field more in sub packages rather than necessarily replace Pete. Because I think you do want to find a way to get all 3 of those linebackers involved. Like you didn't bring in Willie as the replace Pete or nothing guy. You brought him in for purposes. So I don't like it's both of those guys can play well. And if they do, great. You're all the better for it. But you need Pete to, hopefully with a little bit of fire under him, he can step in and take that role more firmly. With Alontae, who's the last guy we'll talk about in this segment, I look at him and I'm talking about him specifically as a slot corner. And when I say the pressure's there, I think the pressure for him is not necessarily, you're not really looking at that second contract yet. He's going into year 3, but you're looking at a guy who it's like, if you want to get on the field this year, which it sure looks like barring injuries, the way you're going to get on the field is at the slot position. You've got to show that like, hey, last year you were kind of learning on the job. You didn't work at the slot all through camp. And then you kind of got thrown in there at the last second. You didn't necessarily get the reps that maybe you needed. And that's what kind of built into some of these struggles as the season went on. That's not just you. Like that's not just, you just can't handle the position, that you've improved over that. And I think that's the idea. So the pressure is to show that's the case. And I don't think you're really going to be able to know this until the season starts. But like, if you still see those same issues, we saw him get benched in 2 of the last 3 games last year. Right. And the reason you want to go back to him is because there's no better option. Now, if you're at a point where you're thinking, we got to bench this guy, he's not playing well enough. then you're going to put Kool-Aid in there and he could win that job through his play. So that's the pressure this year that didn't exist last year for Alante. Now, I think that he is still a great option at outside corner. But again, if you want to get on the field this year, which next year is another story, because I don't think you're going to be able to pay both Marshawn and Debo. So next year, you may be looking at a shot at being the starting outside corner. This year, to get on the field without any injuries, you got to play the slot. So that's the number 6 option in terms of who's facing the most pressure is Alante. Now, there's still guys ahead of him, but he's definitely on that list and pretty high up.
No, you mentioned in the fact, obviously benched twice last year in that spot. You drafted a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry. We've heard that Dennis Allen plans on, seeing how he does outside, inside for the rookie. But man, I still believe in Alante's ability. Like you mentioned, haven't seen enough from him on the outside, but right now he's got to own that slot role if he wants to be on the field. I know he wasn't crazy about the move last year, but like you said, if you want to play this season, because Marshawn and Adebo are still around and they're going to be playing, they got those 1 and 2 corner spots locked down. If you want to be out there, Alante, you have to own that nickel role.
Yeah, they're your starters, and I don't think you're going to trade Marshawn this year. Now, you may next year, but
Right.
I just don't think the value is going to be there this year. And, he's still playing at an extremely high level. So if he's healthy, yeah, he's your starter. And, one thing I'll say for Alante, I think he'll benefit from the offensive change. And I know that's kind of weird, but one of the things he's struggled with was dealing with motion and making sure he was positioned correctly, particularly in that Week 16 game. Right? Like he got benched because he got beat with his eyes and he was getting put out of position. And so I don't know, hopefully dealing with that type of motion, which that's what you're dealing with. That's what every member of this defense is going to have to adjust to, is kind of handling all that pre-snap stuff. And hopefully that'll help him when you get into a game and you have to deal with it. Hopefully you're ready. So that's it. Anything else you want to mention on those guys before we move ahead?
One person I guess I'd put like maybe honorable mention at the bottom there. I don't know if honorable mention is right for this list, but I feel like Blake Grupe's got a little bit of pressure on him this year to be a little more consistent.
There's pressure, but we're going to talk about this in roster battles, right?
Okay.
I don't think that, and it's like, I guess, there's pressure, just like there's pressure on any kicker to be more consistent than you were last year, right? Every kicker is going to miss kicks, and it's the situation that you miss kicks that's always going to be overvalued. But I don't put him very high on the list in the sense that, like, we're going to talk about Charlie Smith throughout camp. Charlie Smith's got a bomb leg. He can make it from 68 or whatever. Like he could kick a mile. But I just don't see him as being as pushing Blake this year. Maybe next year.
No, yeah.
Well, I'm not
even thinking that the spot could be lost. So I'm just saying, going into the season, being the Saints kicker, just too many of those easy makes weren't made for him.
He missed the 2 short kicks, and he's got to be better. But I don't think there's more pressure on him this year than there was last year.
I think his job would be more in danger going into next season if he doesn't have a good showing.
Yeah, because I think you're going to stash Charlie Smith on the practice squad in the international spot. And you're going to bring him back. And I think like this year is about developing Charlie. And then next year, you're going to give him chances in the preseason. Hopefully he shows well there. And then next year, you're going to go into camp and say, this is a real roster battle, assuming he does everything this year. But I don't know. Like it's always, fun to talk about like kicker competitions. I just don't think that's really what's happening this year, but we'll see. That'll be something.
Yeah, I just haven't seen enough from Charlie Smith that I'm worried about him pushing Groupie at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, like, just in terms of pressure, like I have him 18th on my list. I have Lou 19th, right? Like, I think there's always pressure on specialists.
Always close there, honorable mention. You got 15 players on the list.
Yeah, he's the first one that I didn't say in this segment. But I just like, but that's only because like he's here and there is some level of pressure on everybody. And now I only kind of ranked starters. But the guy I put last is DeMario. I put Taysom just above that. Rashid Shaheed I put above that because again, like he's playing with house money. Like he's a UDFA. He's scoring all these touchdowns. Like there's pressure, but there's not a ton of pressure. Like the expectations were so low, and you've already exceeded them. Like guys like Foster, Caesar, Eric. Like there's pressure on these guys, but like I don't know. So they're in that second grouping,
right?
Groupies in that second grouping. Anyway,
heard that.
All right, let's wrap this segment up. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the top 5 players with the most pressure on them
Dun, dun,
going into
dun.
camp, going into the 2024 season. And there's some big names here. So we'll get into it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. One more segment here. We're getting closer, ticking closer to training camp. And we're going through the players with the most pressure on them heading into the 2024 season. We broke down kind of the lower end of the list. Now, this segment, we're going to be going into the top 5 players. And the first one, it's kind of weird because this is a guy who has had really good showings each of his first 2 seasons. The pressure on him this year is to kind of take that leap into the star category at his position. And that's what you see with most star wide receivers is year 3 is when you really get that, okay, we're talking peak performance here, right? And I'm talking obviously about Chris Olave. He's a guy who's caught a good number of passes. He's broken the 1,000-yard barrier each of his first 2 seasons, but both times he did not go into it as the number 1 option. And both times you kind of felt like there was more there that you did not untap quite yet. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on him to show like, no, I'm this receiver room can be led by me. You do not need to feel like you need to go out and find your number 1 option because that is me. And you look at like some other star wide receivers, right? Like you look at Michael Thomas. He was really good his first 2 years. He really broke out in year 3 at 125 catches, 1,400 yards. And obviously year 4 was the 149 catch season. But it was year 3 where you were like, well, okay, yeah, this guy is the truth, right? Like we don't need to be shopping around for star wide receivers because we got one. You look at CeeDee Lamb, who is a player that I would compare Chris Olave to both in the kind of style and trajectory. And you look at CeeDee Lamb years 1 and 2, he was kind of a 75 catch range, 1,000-yard range receiver. Year 3, you're talking 107 catches, 1,359 yards, 9 touchdowns, and he just built upon that in year 4. Tyreek Hill was a guy who, had his biggest breakout in year 3, and then you've kind of built from there. Justin Jefferson was a monster from day 1, but even he, on his own kind of trajectory, year 3 was when he had that like 120-something catch, 1,800-yard season. So even then, even for a guy who started as highly as he did, he really broke out in year 3. So I think that's where I look at Chris and say, this is where, as you kind of head into year 4, and then you're like, man, what kind of extension is this guy looking at with these massive contracts getting handed out? Like, this is where the pressure is on him to deliver so that you go into year 4 not thinking, oh, does he deserve one of those big contracts? But man, how much are we going to have to pay this guy? So I think that there's a lot, and you got a new offense. You got an offense that should be a little bit more amenable to his skill set going into year 2 with the same quarterback. So there shouldn't be that learning curve that you had last year. And the fact of the matter is, like, the Saints need Chris to be that guy. If he kind of stumbles over his own feet and it just kind of, it looks like that 1,000-yard, 70 catch tier is closer to his ceiling than his floor, I think you're in trouble as a team. I think you're in trouble as an offense, because I just don't know how you can compete at a high level if you don't have kind of that 100 catch, 1,400 yard, 10 touchdown guy as your top wide receiver in today's NFL. So that's why I put him on my list.
Yeah, I'm definitely hoping we've seen the floor basically of Chris Olave.
Right.
I definitely think he can do a lot more. And there's no question, you mentioned he is the number 1 guy at wide receiver this year. No Michael Thomas around. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed, number 2 guy. And a lot of questions, obviously, after that. But with Olave, yeah, there was a little bit of disconnect, I guess you could say, with him and Derek Carr last year. Hopefully that can get more on track. And it's going to be a big question, though, too. How is everything going to fit in this new look offense? There's a built-in excuse, obviously, it being year 1 of the Clint Kubiak system. But seeing what was able to transpire with the San Francisco 49ers and the success they were able to have there, like a guy like Brandon Ayuk, I think we're just seeing the base of what Olave can do. And hopefully, yeah, a heck of a lot more in store for this season. I agree. Year 3 has to be massive for him going into that 4th season. Like you said, going not, oh crap, is he worth the money? It's more like, oh no, how much are we going to have to pay him?
Right. And I just think from the offensive perspective of, if if you end this season looking at Chris as like he's an elite number 2, but he's not a number 1, then that's a problem,
right? Yeah,
right. And you're kind of back to the drawing board from an offensive perspective because you're just like, okay, where do we find that number 1 guy? They're not easy to, they're expensive. You gotta. A lot of times you can't sign them. You gotta develop it. You gotta draft and develop because those second contracts are so expensive that I just don't. I don't know.
QB money's becoming wide receiver money now.
But yeah, wide receiver money now is what QB money was like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, number 4, and this is for a completely different reason, but it's Juwan Johnson, and he's not that far into his career that you would say like he's in a completely different category than Chris Olave, but he is in the situation that he is on another he signed an extension. He is now in the second year of that. I wouldn't call it a particularly lucrative extension, but it's a high-level extension for a guy who was a UDFA and converted from wide receiver to tight end a couple of years earlier. It was a 2-year, $12 million deal, and it represented a reasonably significant investment in Juwan as, okay, he's no longer just an option at tight end. He is the tight end. He's the starting tight end. And he just didn't deliver on that last year. And whether that was due to injuries, whether it was due to just not being on the same page with the quarterback, and it took some time, you got to deliver this year. I don't think you're going to get another kind of failure to launch season the way you had last year and then retain that and not have the team feeling like we got to go find another option at tight end. Now you have Dallin Holker, who you feel like could maybe develop into something, but and this team has not shown the proclivity to invest heavily at the tight end position. They never have. Even the great tight ends, you're talking about Jimmy Graham as a 3rd round pick. It's not like you spent a really high asset on him. And Adam Troutman, you traded up, you got him as a 3rd round pick. That obviously didn't work out, but like that has been the ceiling of the investment that the Saints have been willing to make outside of bringing in some veterans like a Jared Cook or a Kobe Fleener. So
yeah, it seems like a position that's been pretty neglected.
I don't know about neglected, but like every few years they feel like they have to reinvest in the free agent market because they have not developed a player.
Right. And
this is Juwan's year where he either has to show that he is that guy or you're back in that kind of cycle of like, okay, who's a free agent we can go get? Because I don't know if they're going to change their draft strategy, but, Juwan at the end of the 2022 season, you felt like, okay, he's a guy who should kind of emerge, and he didn't do that. And you saw over the final month of the season that there is that capability there. And I think the way the offense prioritize the tight end position in the red zone, right, in particular, between he and Taysom Hill with a lot of touchdowns in the final month of the season, I think you can get back to that. So I think there is the ability, but he's got to do that. He's also got to prove he can stay healthy. And right now, he has not done that. We'll see how much time he misses in training camp, because it sounds like he's going to miss at least some time. And I don't know what you would do if he's not ready, because there's just not a lot of faith I'm going to have in a rookie in terms of doing, like, rookies make mistakes. It's what they do. It's why you don't want to rely on rookies.
You're going to rely heavily on Foster, I guess.
Yeah, well, right. Do you end up in a situation where the only guy you trust is Foster Moreau? Right. And no disrespect to Foster, I just think he's limited in terms of as a pass catching tight end. And I wouldn't say he's a elite blocker. He's a solid blocker. He's good enough, but he's not a guy I would look at and be like, oh yeah, that's the top end blocking tight end either. So you end up in a situation where your tight end position is, more of a liability than a strength. So it's on Juwan. Like, Juwan's got to deliver. And this is kind of his, like, he's on that final year of that contract. They didn't extend him. They didn't restructure him. So we got to do it.
Yeah, we're seeing a nice steady climb from Juwan, and then last year it just kind of fell apart for him. Hopefully this year is a season where he can get back to being that more reliable presence, especially in the red zone. 2022 was looked like he was heading into the last season with a lot of promise, and it just didn't end up turning it out that way. And not the greatest start, obviously, for this season. Like you mentioned, we don't know how much camp he's going to miss with his current injury. Hopefully it's not too much time, because I feel like he's going to be an important cog in this offense because of the limitations they do have at tight end.
Yep. No question. All right. Moving forward. and this is a weird one. I debated where exactly to put him on this list, but number 3 for me is Marshon Lattimore. And, again, like there's a lot of different types of pressure here, but for Marshon, it's not going to be a situation where he can really prove anything in camp. Like, we're not going to watch him in camp and be like, oh yeah, I have no question about what he's going to be able to do. It's going to be, can you stay healthy? Can you get on the field? Can you compete at a high level consistently? And not just in the matchups that you circled on your calendar, right? Can you want us to call you the top cornerback in the NFL? Well, to be the top cornerback in the NFL, you got to be it every week, not just 8 of 14 weeks, right? Like, you got to be available and you got to do it week in, week out. And I'm hopeful that's what you see. Now, I look at this season as kind of, you're going to have to pick one, I think, in terms of, are you going to move forward with Marshon? Are you going to move forward with Adebo as your top corner? Now, the ceiling for Marshon is way higher than what you would get with Paulson. Paulson's 3 years younger, but what you've seen from Paulson is a more consistent baseline, at least over the last several years, of like, this guy doesn't miss games, really. Like, he's had a couple injuries, but generally speaking, you know what you're going to get from Paulson. I don't know what I'm going to get week in, week out from Marshon. And I think that's the pressure this season is, they're not going to just give away Marshon for nothing this year. I think there's a chance you go into next season and you're like, we're going to extend Paulson and we're going to get what we can get for Marshon if he doesn't go out this season and deliver at a high level. He's only 28. Like, he's not ancient. Like, you could make the decision, okay, we feel like the replacement level guys are going to give us what we can get out of Paulson, and we're going to continue with the top end corner that we have and that we have faith in. But he's got to show that investment makes sense. And, to his credit, I think he's said all the right things. He doesn't talk a lot, but when he has talked, obviously, I think he's been in the right frame of mind. I'm not questioning whether he means what he says. Right. But I do think that he's questioning to some extent the commitment of the team to him. So I don't know. We'll see. We have to see, like, when things aren't going great, how does that kind of mentality stay? But either way, that's why he's number 3 on my list, because of that. Because I think if you get another season like you did the last 2, then you're just going into an offseason and, it doesn't make sense for them to take kind of that low level trade package this year. I think it will next year. I think you will be in that situation where if you don't think that this is the option, you're not going to force it. You're going to find a way to get what you can move. Yeah. And so, like, that's kind of where I'm at. And I don't think the pressure's on Adebo. I think you know what you're going to get out of Paulson. And it's on Marshon to be like, okay, no, this is me. I'm still that guy.
Yeah, and Alante's just waiting for his turn to, play on the outside.
Right. And again, like, that's why, like, I put Alante lower than Marshon, because I think Alante is kind of like, hey, I know I can play on the outside. Right. It's really just a question whether I can play in the slot. And I do think they'd like to get Alante on the outside. It's just, you don't draft a guy in the second round with the goal of playing him out of position. And so, yeah, we'll see. But I think, like, if Marshon comes out and is that number 1 guy, is that top 5 corner that we all know he can be, that is like the pressure is on Marshon to make this decision going into next season incredibly difficult. And I think he's got to live up to his own hype. Exactly. Going forward, we have 2 more, and this is the 2 players with the most pressure on them heading into this season. And now the obvious pressure is on the quarterback, and so this is obviously Derek Carr. I think any team you would have the quarterback toward the top of, like, this is the player with the most pressure on them. Pat Mahomes is going to have some of the highest pressure, even doing what he's done. He has to go out and prove it every year. The NFL stands for not for long, right? Like, even if you are performing at that high level, you're going to have a ton of pressure on you to be consistent and do that again. With Derek, I think it's different because his pressure is also connected to his head coach. Like, I don't know what happens if you move on from Dennis Allen and you bring in a new coach. Do they stick with Derek Carr? I don't know. Maybe they might not have a choice. But at the end of the day, this idea that there is a connection and like the fates of Derek and Dennis are tied together, I think that's true. I really do. And so there is pressure on Derek not only to perform at a high level, but, like, if he doesn't, and you end up having to reset the deck. Who knows where they go from here? Who knows if that's the last opportunity he gets as a starter in the NFL? So there is pressure. There's a ton of pressure. Now, you look at his first year with the Saints and you look at the final numbers, and you kind of are at your career averages. Like, that's the weird thing about his first year is you're talking about 3,500 plus yards, 25 touchdowns, nearly 70% completions, under 10 interceptions. On its face, that's not a bad season. And I think, again, we talked about this, the relative just animosity toward Derek is at least in part because people don't like that coach. That said, you watch it play out and you can appreciate that the stats themselves are not necessarily telling you the full story, because there were consistency issues. He made up a lot of that gap over the final 6 weeks of the season. And that gap was there to be made up because of the inconsistency, particularly in the red zone over the first 10 weeks of the season. And you can point to injuries, you can point to whatever. There's pressure on him to show that the final half of the season is the real Derek Carr. And the first half of the season was kind of a guy kind of finding his way with a new team and a new system, with a new set of receivers, with a new cast of characters, with a suspect offensive line. So here we are. You
said it great there. And obviously that suspect offensive line is continuing into this year.
Yes. And that's a little foreshadowing here, but it's got to be on the quarterback. It's always going to be on the quarterback. It's the most important position in all of sports. Like, I can't think of another position in any sport that has more pressure on it just fundamentally than the quarterback of a football team. It's just the fact of the matter. So
I guess maybe you could put it kind of equivalent to a starting pitcher.
Yeah, but you only pitch one every 5 days.
Right. That's the thing. Yeah, you only have that pressure once every 5 days.
If you had 5 different starting quarterbacks and you only had to perform well one day of the week.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You only have to perform one day of the week. You get the idea. But I mean, They play 16 games, so everything's amped on that one game. Now, for Derek too, it's twofold. You need to be consistent throughout the regular season, but there's a level of sketchiness that comes with a quarterback who's never won a playoff game. And you can argue that it's circumstantial. You can argue that, okay, when you play with a bad defense for that long, your chances of winning playoff games aren't great. You can argue accurately that his best chance to win a playoff game was in the season that he broke his leg in week 17, right? Like, that was the Raiders' best team. They were a legitimate playoff team. They didn't back in. Like, his only playoff start, they had to win their final 4 games, I think, to get in the show, and they lost to the Bengals in the first round. So that's a tough one. Whereas the year that was their best chance to make a run in the playoffs, they got a home game. They lost to the Texans with a backup. So it's not a scenario where you look at it and you can say, well, he's never gotten there. He has gotten there. It's been difficult. That said, you can only make excuses for a guy so long before that's just what your career is you never got through in the playoffs. Daniel Jones has won a playoff game, right? like Kirk Cousins has only won one playoff game, but it was a game we all remember. You got to be that guy, and you got to prove you're that guy. And maybe you are that guy, but until you show it, I don't believe it. So we'll see. Either way, if it's going to happen for him, it's got to happen soon. Like, if you're going to break through, it's not going to happen in year 16 for the first time. Like, year 11, is it year 11? I think it's year 11 for him. Like, if it's not going to happen now in a weak NFC South with, a team that's committed to you fully, when is it going to happen? So that's where the pressure is. Like, you got to have that defining moment, and it's got to happen soon, because I don't know how many more chances you're going to get.
No, I wouldn't argue with you if you had Carr number 1, because like you mentioned, that QB position is just so damn important in the NFL. We see the likes of, obviously, a Patrick Mahomes doing what he does. He makes it look effortless, but it sure ain't.
I had him number 1 initially, and I changed it because, I do think that, there were some things that he was able to get off his plate at the end of last year in terms of that final month of the season really helped assuage some of the serious concerns of where is this guy? Where is the guy that we expected to see? Because we did see it. Well, over the final month of the season, you saw the quarterback that you expected early in the season. He was healthy. He was taking advantage of his weapons. The Saints were winning football games. There was obviously the hiccup in LA, but that was about the entire team. It wasn't just about Derek. So that helped. And I think that kind of gives me a little bit of confidence that, like, okay, we can take some of that off of him and put it on other people. and that's why I put this guy at the top. And I don't think it's unfair at all to say it's Trevor Penning at number one. He's like the player on the Saints with the most pressure on them to not only prove that they can start, but prove that they can be an NFL player is Trevor. And,
it's kind of disturbing when the team's already talking about a fresh start with him and we haven't seen really any start from Penning.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, so the excuse that you can make, the reasonable excuse is, okay, he didn't have an off season before his year two. Year one, when you're kind of just trying to get your feet under you, you dealt with an injury right before the start of the season. You got back late in the year. You finished the year with an injury. And the question is, man, okay, are you injury prone? Are you not able to hack it from an injury perspective? You didn't have an off season. You spent it all rehabbing. You came back and they threw you in before you were ready. And what player is going to be like, I'm not ready, don't play me, right? So you got to put that at least somewhat on the coaching. There's a new coaching staff in there now. There's a new offensive line coach. There's a new offensive coordinator. There's a new just about everything on the offense. So you now have some tape you can work off. You started 5 weeks. You got 5 weeks to use that as teach tape and get better. You're on the right side of the line. Okay. Like, you're giving you your chance. They're saying, we are not going to hold that against you. We are going to hope you learn from it and you improve. Those excuses don't exist now. You have had an entire offseason and you've got to deliver and be a serviceable starting right tackle. If you cannot get it done this year, your only option left is to be kind of an emergency. Let's see if he can hack it at guard. You become Eric Flowers, right? Like, that's who you are as a player. And then there's some pressure there, right? Like, because you can't just say, hey, we're going to help Trevor every play. You can't say, like, hey, we're going to throw the tight end over there because we can't trust him. Because you also have a rookie left tackle. You have to be the consistent tackle on the right side because the rookie's going to be a rookie. He's a rookie. That's what he is. Rookies make mistakes. Rookies struggle. Rookies learn on the job. You can't play like a rookie on the right side and also have a rookie on the left side. So that's the pressure. Like, because you're going to want to help Taliesin, you're going to want to bring him along and get his feet on the ground early in the season. And so you need some consistency on the right side because they are not going to just put their, like teams don't just put their star pass rusher on the left anymore. They move them around. Like, you are going to have to deal with guys one-on-one. And how he handles that, particularly early in the season, like, if he's a turnstile, you're not going to get very far this season, right? Like, if the offensive line cannot keep Derek Carr on his feet, and that's part of the reason, like, you can put all the pressure on Derek Carr, but if he's running for his life constantly, you're not going to have success, and it's not going to be about Derek. It's going to be about the offensive line. So the pressure is going to be on the line to give Derek a chance. Now, no one will be happy with Derek if he's, peeling himself off the turf constantly. But if that's the case, and your only option is kind of the 3-step, get the ball out and hope for the best all season long, then there's really nothing that you could have done differently at the quarterback position to do that. So that's why Trevor is at the top of my list. But Trevor is really more indicative of the group as a whole. Like, Trevor is kind of the most glaring concern on an offensive line that's littered with concerns. So we'll see.
That's a fact for sure. No, what's, I guess, scary for me about Penning is we saw last year, even with injuries, that coaching staff had no confidence in putting him into games. We'll see. If you mentioned, obviously, it's a whole new cast and crew leading the way for the offense and offensive line. So hopefully they can do something to reignite that fire in Penning, because we kept hearing what a nasty mauler this guy was and just hasn't been a presence for this black and gold squad yet.
Yeah, I think to some extent that year two should have been kind of a wake-up call of, like, if there was work you weren't doing, go friggin' do it. I don't know I don't want to question a guy's work ethic, but like Doug Marrone didn't like him. Like
it seems that way for sure, right?
There's no way that relationship was a good one. So how do you kind of fix that, right? Like, I hope he's just kind of a pest in John Benton's ear. I hope he's a pest in his teammates' ears. I hope he's constantly there and understanding that, like, if you were ever going to put in that extra work, it's got to be now. And so we'll see. Again, like, he didn't have this opportunity last year, right? Like, this time of year, we were still talking about, okay, is he going to be there at the start of training camp, or is he going to be dealing with that foot injury, that rehab into camp? He was there on day one. He was healthy. We aren't sitting here talking about, okay, can he stay healthy? He was healthy. Obviously it's a little easier to stay healthy when you aren't playing for 11 weeks, but he stayed healthy for that first 5 weeks, right? Which is something he had not done previously, is play an extended period of games. So he did, that's a positive. You can look at that as a positive, where we're not sitting here talking about, can his feet hold up at all? Because like, he had injuries to both feet in his rookie season. So we'll see, but that's, we're not going to know, like, and we can talk about it all throughout camp. We're not going to really know until the season gets here. And when we see it in games and we see him trying to, I guess in those joint practices when he has to line up against Nick Bosa, and we'll have an idea of, like, is he going to run in terror, or is he going to be sprinting, trying to save the quarterback's life, that sort of thing. But that's
those joint sessions are going to be quite entertaining, obviously, for a number of reasons, but man, oh man, to see how a guy like Penning stacks up against that San Fran pass rush will be one to watch. And man, I know there's definitely a lot of questions about just in general the Saints scouting department with these offensive linemen of late.
Well, I mean, really only one.
Caesar? There's been a lot of question about him.
He's been consistent. I mean, I'd say he's the best interior lineman from that class. No, I don't know. Like, the only real whiff to this point has been Trevor. Like Andres, I feel like, while he didn't necessarily keep people happy, he was just a 3-time Pro Bowler. Like, he's been a decent player. He delivered when you were asked him to play left tackle. So you can't get too mad at that. Eric has been a really, really good player. Right. We don't know about Saldivari yet. So, that might change my tune a little bit if he can't hack it. But to this point, it seems like they're confident that he'll be able to play. So I don't know. Well, we'll see, right? Like, if Trevor turns a corner this year and suddenly he looks like a serviceable tackle, then wouldn't we be looking at it and saying, man, they've really nailed all these draft picks on the offensive line?
Then everyone will just be carrying torches for Doug Marrone.
Yeah. Let's hope it was all Doug.
Yeah, it's Doug all his fault.
And, even Landon Young, I think, has been a serviceable draft pick. He was a 6th-round pick, and he's started games for you. He's a consistent player. So, I don't know. We'll see, right? Like, but when it's that 1st-round pick and you miss, and you follow that up with like a Peyton Turner pick, or you're following up a Peyton Turner pick, then it becomes really, really painful to talk about. So
yeah, but to me, O-line and defensive end have been rough
in the 1st round. Yeah. And we'll see with Isaiah, but yeah, when I think it was Scott Shanley who mentioned this, it's like, those are tough positions to draft, but when you miss on them early, when you miss on big guys early in the draft, it really sets you back, because not only are you not getting that impact from them, you're constantly trying to find someone who can make that impact, and they're very difficult to find. Usually they're expensive, and you're trying to sign someone off in the free agent market who is kind of a wild card. You don't really know. And then, you end up with a Larry Warford, and, where it's tough. So we'll see how that
goes. I'll take a Larry Warford at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you need a tackle, but either way, yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, that 2018, I think we all talked a lot of shit about that 2018, 2019 offensive line group when it was happening. Like, no one would ever shut up about Andres Pete, this and that. And now you look back and like, man, if only we had that 2019 offensive line, man. Oh, man, Larry Warford getting put on skates.
It'll be the biggest question, obviously, for this season, I think, overall, is that O-line.
Agreedo. Yeah. But all right, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Inside Black and Gold. Thanks, everyone, for hanging with me. We're getting close. Start of training camp. I think I fly out on the 22nd. And then we will be all going. It's going to be like training camp for me. I won't have any distractions. Like I won't have to walk my dog. I won't do anything. So it'll be kind of nice. So I was thinking about that. I was like, man, training camp is usually a real slog because it's like I got all this other stuff to do. I kind of feel like I'm a part of the team in the sense of like they want to get the team away from all their distractions. Like, what am I going to be distracting myself with? I'm gonna have to like force myself to not work and do other stuff while I'm there. So.
The toughest part for me for those Greenbrier years was definitely just being away from family. That's it.
Yeah, but they don't even like me. I'm already away from family. It's only my wife.
Well, the wife. I meant like for me, it was the wife and kid.
Yeah,
and for you, it'll be the wife and dog.
Claire's gonna get so mad when she has to walk that dog every day. But all right, thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back to you later in the week. One of two things. We either do a live mailbag, which we've been promising forever and have yet to do. I blame Steve though, because Steve got sick when we were going to do it last time, and so I bailed. But we'll either do that or we'll do the position. We'll figure it out. It's more of a time crunch issue. But we'll get back to you with a second episode this week, and we'll getting closer to training camp. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. You can hit me up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can hit Steve up at Steve Geller WWL or the show at Saints_pod. Who dat? Go Saints.
Hope your AC's cold, everyone.
Be easy, y'all. Peace.